Welcome to Intelligent Automation Radio, the number one podcast for IT executives seeking insights on the impact and opportunities for innovation that automation is delivering to businesses around the world. Featuring thought leaders in AI, machine learning, orchestration, security automation, and the future of work. And now, on with the show. Welcome, everyone. We have another great guest for this edition of Intelligent Automation Radio. Joining us today is Alessandro Perilli, the General Manager of Management Strategy for Red Hat, who are, of course, best known for the Linux distribution of the same name, but they do lots of other things too. Alessandro is focused on long-term strategy for the company's efforts in automation, artificial intelligence, and IT security, among other things. And all of these are topics this podcast is very focused on as well. He is a highly regarded expert on cloud management and virtualization, and is a frequent speaker at major industry events. Alessandro, welcome to Intelligent Automation Radio.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Your name really rolls off the tongue and it's fun to pronounce, so I may be saying it quite a few times today.
That's fun. No problem.
Alessandro, before you became General Manager of Management Strategy for Red Hat, you were a Gartner analyst in charge of cloud computing and automation for over 3 years. And during that time, you no doubt had numerous conversations with high-level IT executives at large enterprises around the world. So could you please share with the audience what you would tell organizations are the top 3 reasons they should consider automating their IT, cybersecurity, and DevOps operations?
So when I was with Gartner, I started almost 7 years ago, and the time was very different. The kind of environment that we had was quite a different situation compared to now. The public cloud computing was starting to emerge, and now it's a reality, well-established one. And so the kind of advice that I have for top executives in large enterprises at that time is kind of different than the one that I would have for them today. So if this is a question for today, as I think it is, the answer is there is just one answer, which is you technically have no choice but to automate to cope with the scale and complexity of very large IT environment that exists today. I'm not talking just about public cloud environment that facilitate the large-scale deployment of workloads because of the infinite elasticity that they offer at a relatively cheap price, but also because even when you are on premises in private cloud infrastructure or in a hybrid cloud IT environment, you start to shift from traditional monolithic application architecture to more disaggregated ones. And so you start to go for microservices architecture in some cases. You start supported by virtual machines, but then containers, and then eventually function. So even within the same single application, you start to have a lot of moving parts, and there are a number of complexities that are related to provisioning those parts, and then be sure that those parts are properly configured and updated and patched and retired and replaced and so on. And then you need to multiply that single application architecture that has become so complex for all the other applications that you have in a public or a hybrid cloud environment. To give a sense of the scale, but this is something that any CIO in a large enterprise knows already. The average size of an application portfolio in a large end user organization, like the ones I used to consult for when I was in Gartner, is of over 1,000 applications. Now, this over 1,000 applications, you used to have a monolithic architecture with just 3 tiers, right? The web front end, the middleware, the backend services, the database, and that was it. And now instead you move from those 3-tier architecture to 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 containers in a microservice architecture. So there is an explosion of components, and then there is the infinite scalability I mentioned before that forces the use of automation. There is no chance that a human operator, no matter how skilled and no matter how well paid, can possibly cope with that level of complexity. So this is a number one, the only piece of advice that I feel it's really necessary to get.
Yeah, that's something that we talk about all the time here, is that people don't scale very well. And that's why automation is really the only practical alternative to dealing with the complexity, the explosion in demand for computing resources, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
What are the big challenges you see today in automating IT and cybersecurity environments?
So cybersecurity is a very special, I would say, layer or corner of the whole IT organization and the computing stack. There are at least two major issues that I see today. And in my role, I talk to a lot of organizations about automating security. The number one is that if you look at the security ecosystem as is today, you see that there is a massive, unprecedented amount of security solutions in the market, not just from established vendors, but also from startups that emerge in waves every year. The amount of capital that is invested by venture capital firms into the security industry is reaching unprecedented peaks. We're talking about almost 4 billion, according to the last research here by CB Insights. And this amount of capital to build new solutions corresponds to an enormous amount of spending on the end user organization side. And we're talking about something close to $100 billion spent on security solutions, okay? Now, I used to be in security when I was very young at the beginning of my career, almost 20 years ago. And you would expect that since then, a lot of the problems that existed at that time has been solved, has been addressed, and are pretty much solved problem from an engineering standpoint. But actually, it's not the case. And you would expect that the ecosystem would have consolidated compared to those times. And instead, no. The ecosystem has grown and grown and grown and is exploding in size. So you will lead to think that, okay, there is this explosion of vendors, this is the injection of capital, there's a massive amount of spending. These solutions are all for new problems that emerge as we got to deal with new technologies. But it's not even the case, quite the opposite. The problems that we're trying to solve with this new wave of solutions are always exactly the same that existed 20 years ago. So there is an inherent inefficiency in the way the security industry is doing things that is not being fixed by any of this new wave of startups that promise to disrupt the space. Quite the opposite. If you look at Gartner surveys or IBM surveys or all sorts of Silence surveys, all sorts of companies from all different corners of the IT industry, they all confirm that chief information security officers are more and more concerned about their capability to secure, to protect the environment, to respond to attacks. And this is getting worse. A lot of them complain that they don't have enough security personnel to address this. And a lot of them lament that the intensity of the attack increased and the time to respond to the attack increased as well. So why is all of this? There is always a number of concurrent factors, like in every very complicated situation. But I personally believe, and this is the first or the two main problems that we have today in cybersecurity in terms of automation, is that when you look at the ecosystem, these vendors, these solutions don't integrate with each other. They just don't. They don't talk to each other in any way. Yes, there are minor connection integrations between one or two solutions that are provided by the same vendor, or there might be integration between two different vendors that decide to get together in a partnership for a limited amount of time because it's a marketing effort. But other than that, there is not a universal integration layer. And the standards that have been provided in the past didn't have any market traction, to the point that now we have a new wave of standards that are trying to solve the problem. And this is a never-ending cycle attempting to solve the problem, which is clearly not working. So this is number one problem. The biggest one problem is that even if you want to automate the security industry, These tools don't integrate with each other. These solutions don't integrate with each other. So that is the first problem to solve. The second problem is not technical, it's not standards, it's nothing to do with the industry per se, but it's cultural. Security professionals, and I come from that word, so it's very familiar to me, they are just very, very against automation. There is a general mindset that is, we're not going to automate security because things can be blocked, mission critical services and systems could be just stopped and somebody's going to complain, and we don't want to get into the sort of liability responsibility and so on, which is insane. It would be like AWS, Amazon saying, we don't run automation with AWS. We prefer to do things by hand because, we don't trust automation. That will never reach the scale that they reach. But Amazon.com, in terms of warehouses, for example, for the retail part of the business, and in terms, of course, of cloud computing, this is just untenable. So the mindset of the security professional has to change and has to evolve to accept and embrace the fact that at this scale, at this level of complexity, the only way is to automate the security layer, just like all the others have been automated. Computing, storage, networking, all of them. Security is the last one, and that has to change.
And I think with the others, there was also some resistance at the outset. But I think with security, there's a more pronounced problem, and that is that according to various surveys and studies, by 2021, there's going to be somewhere around 3.5 million unfilled positions in security. And you're just, in the next 3 years, less than 3 years, you're simply not going to find enough people to get trained on the complexities of security in that time period. And so the only solution is to automate a lot of the work that those people need to do.
Absolutely. But even if you would have enough skilled personnel that is available to do those things, you will still not be able to cope with the speed. So far, I've been talking about scale and complexity, but there is a third element, a third dimension that will get into play very soon in the near future, which is the speed. What happens when artificial intelligence is used to drive these hacking attempts, these attacks? At what speed the attacks and variations of the same attacks all around the world are executed if it's an AI that is driving that kind of effort? How a human, no matter if there are enough humans, but how a single human can cope with that speed, that is beyond the possibilities that any of us have. And so the only possibility here is that we go for automation, regardless of the personnel availability.
Yeah, that's another thing that we tell people as well, is that the attacks being launched against you are usually automated. So shouldn't your defenses be as well?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
What do you feel then are the top skills a CIO, a CTO, a Chief Information Security Officer should encourage their staff to acquire in preparation for implementing automation in their environment?
So there are at least a couple of aspects that are connected to each other. The first one is that, in my experience at least, a lot of the security professionals, but also the traditional IT operation people that might or might not be involved in security, don't have a sense of operations at scale. They have a certain size of data center to deal with, but it's nothing even remotely close to the size of an AWS or an Azure or a Google Cloud and even the smaller public cloud service providers. So a top skill to acquire for all of these professionals is to start to understand how things change at scale. What does it mean to rethink an operational framework or a security framework at the scale that we are about to face or we are facing already? That is number one. The second aspect is that, connected to this, is that I saw a lot of security professionals looking at automation as a very tactical tool, as a system that can, in a very small pockets and limited fashion, try to be used to solve a minor task in the security analysis process. And that is, I believe, limiting the possibilities that automation offers in security. So my recommendation would be to shift in thinking in thinking security as a tactical tool and thinking more in terms of strategy. Okay, so security as automation, part of the security framework being used systematically and in a pervasive way throughout all the different operations that a security team performs during the day could really make a difference in terms of the approach and the posture that the team has towards the discipline.
So in a kind of related question to that, what are your thoughts about general purpose automation platforms versus function-specific automation platforms? So specifically for IT process automation, specifically for cybersecurity automation, specifically for DevOps.
Mm-hmm. So this is a topic I'm extremely passionate about, because I saw throughout this 2 decades of career with Gartner, before Gartner, now after Gartner, I saw exactly what happens with customers, no matter how skilled they are put in front of general purpose automation tools or platform or frameworks, or call it in the way you want. So what happens is that when there's tools, and not just these tools, by the way, any sort of IT toolkit that has general purpose capability suffers the same kind of issue, in my experience. And it's this: when customers are put in front of these general purpose tools, they come to the table with a very specific use case or 2 or 3 use cases in mind. And they have been offered something that in theory could solve all those use cases, because the general purpose nature of the platform is such that can be adapted to solve different issues. But in practice, this general purpose platform is not excellent at any of these use cases. They require quite a lot of effort from the end user organization side in terms of crafting and adapting to the specific circumstances, the business needs that they have for that certain use case A, B, or C. So customers struggle to see the immediate return on the investment and the actual value of general purpose platform. They very much prefer, even if in theory is counterintuitive, that when they are asked logically what they prefer, of course they prefer a general purpose platform, because they think that they can return on the investment in a lot more use cases, so just bigger return. But in practice, they always go for point solutions. They tend to prefer point solution. And this is the same kind of approach, if you think about it, that you would have in your home repair on a Sunday morning at home kind of routine. If you're doing some sort of home fix of any sort, you have 2 choices. You go for a Swiss Army knife that is a general purpose tool set, right? Or you go for highly specialized tools that are more efficient at solving a problem. A hammer, a screwdriver, and so on. Why does it that humans always go for the specialized tool rather than just buy and use a single general purpose platform? The reason is that we tend to think in terms of what is the most efficient tool to get the job done. No matter if that fills the drawer and takes all the space, and it costs probably 10 times more than a general purpose platform. We tend to go in that direction. And I saw over and over and over in my career in IT, general purpose technologies and approaches failing over a long time for a lack of market traction, for what I believe is this reason.
So touching upon the issue of the talent gap and the skills shortage, I want to change gears a little bit and ask you about chatbots, which have become very popular lately as a new channel for IT organizations to deliver automated self-service. What do you think the future looks like for automated self-service versus the traditional way of delivering support via a service desk?
Okay, so this is an interesting question, and I have a very strong opinion about chatbots in general. Not necessarily popular opinions, but these are also 2 questions in one. One is the future of self-service provisioning, and another one is what the chatbots, what kind of opportunity, market opportunity is there for them. So we saw an explosion in the industry, regardless of automation, regardless of cybersecurity, of IT operation in general. Chatbots at quite a momentum in the last few years. But then now we're seeing a lot of companies that were offering the solutions just stopping doing so. I think Facebook is one of them. There were a number of news in the market recently about the fact that chatbots didn't create that kind of strong momentum as was initially expected. And what was the reason for that? In my opinion, chatbots are just front ends. They are not really solving the behind the scene problem, which is how do I automate a number of processes in the most efficient way, in a way that is not complex, that is manageable, that is documented in a way that doesn't require extraordinary amount of efforts in terms of integration and customization. They are front ends that leverage artificial intelligence to do natural language processing, and they are in theory meant to simplify the interaction with the customer. But the problem is that the level of technology maturity that we have today is far, far, far away from what is supposed to be. I am an Amazon Echo, and so Amazon Echo customer, and so I use Alexa all the time. To do all sorts of tasks, and I've been doing for quite a few years, and I try all the other assistants that exist on the market. And I have to say that there is a massive gap between what this state-of-the-art solution are doing today in terms of natural language processing versus what is in our mind after watching series like Star Trek The Next Generation or movies like Hair, for example. It is so far away. So the chatbot per se is not yet going to give you that extra help that we hope it will in one day, in terms of simplifying the interaction with the automation layer for the provisioning of whatever you're trying to provision. So this is first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is, okay, what is the future of self-service? In provisioning, in orchestration, and all the other things. I see, and I've been seeing this for quite a long time, a shift in terms of power, control, autonomy that moves from central IT to line of business. The line of business are gaining more and more autonomy, control over the budget, selection of technologies that they want to use. And I tend to think in terms of, okay, how can I get as fast as possible to the business outcome I'm hoping to have? Because they are measured by completely different metrics compared to the central IT. Central IT has a completely different mindset from a line of business. So in this trend that I see accelerating, and in part is fueled by this DevOps methodology kind of approach, agile methodology, the capability for engineers to be completely independent, all of this is just accelerating this autonomy. And so the need for self-service is increasing and is driven by, I would say, a frustration of the line of business that have been depending by the IT operation team for way too long. And the IT operation team, the central IT, has been too inefficient for way too long. And so there's now this demand to let me do whatever I can in a fully automated way. And when that is not delivered by central IT, what happens is that, and I saw this so many times in the last 10 years, then the line of business simply circumvents all the rules that exist in terms of compliance, in terms of security, and then just go and use public cloud service providers, often in the form of software as a service, to just get the job done as fast as possible. So I think that the future is going to be completely automated in so many more ways than the ones we see today. I don't know if the front end for that automation will be chatbots, because I don't see enough progress, but certainly we will have a way more automated future.
I think that shadow IT, which is kind of the catch-all term for what you just described, is definitely something that we're seeing more and more of, and it's being enabled by the public clouds like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud.
Yeah.
So with that emerging trend and with the move towards an inevitable automation future, what is the one piece of advice you would give to CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, considering whether or not to dive into automation?
Well, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, I don't think that any of these persona have any choice. They are forced to at least understand what does it mean to operate at scale, to do IT operations or to do security at scale. And the professionals that report to them need to develop that kind of awareness, if not the skills, to just cope with the kind of speed that we see today in the market, in the world. So the one piece of advice is certainly to invest a lot in education. I am amazed. I know this is a small thing, or it sounds so. I'm amazed by how many executives in very large enterprises never went to attend an Amazon reInvent conference, and I never saw in person what we're talking about here. So a lot of people read about this in press articles or in news outlets, but they don't quite understand or develop the awareness that is necessary. So training is for the executives in the underline. It's critical to understand that there is no other option. This is one thing to focus on. I'm a big believer in education, so I believe that training is fundamental to progress in any kind of IT management or enterprise endeavor in a large organization. This is certainly one thing. The other thing is, as I said before, to start considering automation not as a tactical tool that can kind of shave off some of the time that you spend in doing a number of tasks, but reconsider it completely as a strategic tool to drive IT operations. There is a reason why public cloud providers like AWS that started from scratch are getting so massive and so popular and so efficient and can drive the cost down at the level that it is today. And that reason is that they designed from scratch the entire IT architecture to be automated. That was the first thing that was part of the design guidelines. And so the IT operations, but in general, the central IT as an organization today faces that sort of competition, faces the competition of public cloud service providers that offer a better service, a faster service, a more automated service to their own line of business compared to what is offered within the corporate boundaries. So we're really talking about is existential risk today for the CIO, for the CTO, for the Chief Information Security Officer. There is all of them are at risk of losing their audience, and the audience is what validates their presence in the enterprise, because they simply cannot think in the same way a public cloud service provider is thinking. So the mindset has to change before anything else in terms of processes, in terms of technologies can change.
Alessandro, we're running low on time, but I can't let you go without asking about the H+ project you're the founder of. Can you please tell our audience a little bit about what that is and the kinds of things you're working on?
Sure. So that is, first of all, I need to say that that is not in any way related to my work in Red Hat. It's a side project. I'm very interested and I've been studying a lot for years, a number of different disciplines that are related to human body augmentation or human enhancement technologies, as the industry calls them. And they go from neural interfaces to bionic prosthetics to genetic engineering, precision medicine, nanorobotics, and so on and on and on. And the reason why I got passionate about this thing, I have side passion for neuroscience and genetics and cognitive psychology, is that I believe that we are at a fundamental point of change for the way humans process information today. The scale of information is so massive for us to process that you can tell by just looking at how people are glued to their phone when you go on a tube, when you go on a train, when you just at an office and everybody's looking at the phone rather than talking to each other. The amount of information that must be processed is so massive, and there is such a social pressure to be sure that this information is processed in the most efficient way, and so you are hyper-reactive to what the world is saying around you, that there is no other way eventually than the one to augment yourself. I strongly believe that just like traditional prosthetics that exist today in the world, including things like very simple like contact lenses or pacemakers and so on, as those things became the norm and are perfectly accepted from a societal perspective, so the augmentation in the sense of blending together technology with the biology to increase human capabilities and process more information and being faster in making decisions and better in making decisions, computer assisted, if you want to say in this way, is going to be a mandatory step for the humankind. I don't see any possibility for the future. So I'm very interested in that. And I'm interested in understanding what startups are doing what in the space and what kind of new academic research comes out. And so H Plus is an open research initiative that basically collects in a completely open way. So anybody can access completely free, can access to all the things that I collect in my free time that talks about all these different technologies. And that's basically it. It's a way to track how we're going in terms of the next stage of what I believe will be our evolution.
That's great. And all those issues that you're covering, they just prove that there's no longer anything such as science fiction. It's just science.
Absolutely.
All right. Looks like that's all the time we have for today. Alessandro, I've really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you again for being our guest.
Likewise. It was great. Thank you.
Alessandro Perilli, General Manager of Management Strategy for Red Hat and founder of the H Plus Project. Thank you for listening, everyone. And remember, don't hesitate. Automate. Thank you so much for listening today. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. We publish new shows regularly, and you won't want to miss one. And please remember to give us a rating. It helps others find the show. Intelligent Automation Radio is sponsored by Ayehu, the leader in intelligent automation solutions for IT and cybersecurity. You can get more information about Ayehu by visiting our website at ayehu.com. That's AYEHU.com. Ayehu, creating the successful path to the self-driving enterprise.